Hello everybody, this is Altarox, and I'm going to be making an alternate history video about what if Carthage won the Second Punic War. So, the point of divergence in this timeline is, after Cannae, Hannibal chose not to, I assume you know, at least the baseline about the Second Punic War. He chose to not march into an undefended Rome, instead to march across the countryside and take supplies. In this scenario, he takes Rome and forces the Senate to surrender. They go by a treaty which leads Carthage to retake their Mediterranean holdings, which is like they keep West Sicily. They take West Sicily. Sardinia and Corsica, and they basically puppet Syracuse, who was Rome's ally, and Rome is also forced to disband their fleet and never raise a new one, and Carthage annexes Saguntum, which is in Spain. One of the causes of this is that Archimedes, who's an inventor, survived because he was actually killed by the Romans in their siege of Syracuse, which wouldn't have happened. And eventually, though, King Hero II of Syracuse would die and would be succeeded by his pro-Carthage heir, Hieronymus. Rome is forced not to help the Aetolian League, so the Macedonians defeat them, becoming the definite strongest nation in Greece. Hannibal just leaves Italia and goes back to rule Carthago Novo, which is basically Spain. Hannibal, the Barca family, were treated like gods there. Although it wasn't as big, but in this scenario, it would probably get bigger over the years, their worship of him, of their family, because of just the more time that the Barcas would be leading. But they had a lot of autonomy from the leaders of Carthage. Publius Cornelius Scipio, who was who fought in the war in Spain, becomes Roman consul. He was actually Scipio Africanus' father, and I'll be referring to Scipio Africanus usually as Scipio Africanus, even though that wouldn't be his name in this timeline. He during his year-long term, he would have to repel many Gallic invasions and squash some small Samnite and Etruscan revolts. And from 215 BC to 207 BC, Macedon would conquer Greece in a series of wars, as well as the Carthago Novans would expand more into Spain. In 203 BC, the Third Punic War would happen because another war would be inevitable over the Romans wanting to invade Sicily. Publius Cornelius Scipio is appointed dictator, and he goes off to fight in Spain. His son, who's Scipio Africanus, would go to fight in Sicily, but wouldn't be able to breach the walls of Syracuse. And Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina, who is the brother of Publius Cornelius Scipio, would take command in Illyria, because Macedon would be fighting on the side of the Carthaginians, and Illyria's Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Montenegro, that. And Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, who was he created the Fabian tactics. He would be placed in power. He was be old at the time. He'd be placed in power in the Po Valley, which is in northern Italy, as a rear guard to stop what Hannibal did happening again. Scipio Africanus would continue his campaign in Sicily, and Publius Cornelius Scipio would just take some Spanish towns. Originally there would be mild success for the Romans, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina would win a few battles, but would probably then be defeated by Macedonia. I think Sparta and some of the other Greek city-states, not necessarily Sparta, but I just wrote that. But many Greek city-states, and probably including Sparta, would rise up against Macedon. And eventually Hannibal and Hasdrubal would defeat Publius Cornelius Scipio in several battles in Spain and probably capture him. They would march across southern Gaul into Italia. Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina, with his remainder of forces, merge with Fabius. Yeah, I'm just gonna call him Fabius in the Po Valley. The new Roman fleet that they would probably raise is defeated because Carthage had the definite advantage in the navy. Fabius would die in camp, probably because he died around this time, and I'm not going to say, oh, well, he did die exactly the same way, but he was old at the time, and I'm just going to say he dies in like a riding accident or something, because that happened a lot in history, just chance deaths, and giving Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina, who like the Asina part actually meant ass, complete control over Roman forces in Italy. The Carthaginians would probably send an army to land in western Sicily. Carthage's army was made mostly of mercenaries, so you could probably see the ramifications of that. They had a lot of like army mutinies and such and revolts, and I'll talk about that later. And Scipio Africanus, he was a good commander. I don't think he was better than Hannibal though. He won at Zara, Zara. But Hannibal's army was much more wearied and smaller and unsupplied. But Scipio Africanus would defeat this larger force in a battle, cementing him as a war hero. Hannibal would defeat Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina at a battle in the Po Valley. That's a given. And Scipio would try to get into Italy, and would probably defeat the Syracusan army, but still not be able to take the city. He probably couldn't get into Italy, though, because the way to get in is through the Straits of Messina, and the Carthaginian navy would have probably blocked the straits. And during this time, as Rome's situation is perilous, the Samnites, who had fought Rome's multiple times in the past with the 3 Samnite Wars, would probably revolt, and Hannibal would lay siege to Rome. Hasdrubal, who's Hannibal's brother, I didn't mention that, but I assume people know, with a small detachment of men, would go to Capua and get them to revolt. Hasdrubal, the new Capuan army, and the Samnite army would probably defeat the last Roman forces in Italia just outside of Tarentum, and Hannibal would repeat what he did before and march to the Senate and make Rome surrender. Samnium and Capua would probably become independent. Rome's navy would disband, and Rome's army size would be cut. This would happen in like 201 BC. Due to the turmoil from this, the Etruscans and Apulians would revolt. The Apulians would succeed, but the Etruscans fail, because I believe Rome wouldn't be out for the count. They would still be able to crush the Etruscans. And Scipio Africanus, who was a war hero, he never lost a fight, he would be appointed dictator because of the revolts, but I say he would not step down and create the title Populi Dux, meaning people's leader. It would basically form like a dictatorship. Excuse me, I have a cold. Carthage would probably war with Ptolemaic Egypt, and Carthago Novo would finally conquer Hispania, and the Macedonians, who would be stronger this time, would fight the Thracians and the Dacians, who wouldn't be united, but I'm just going to refer to the people groups as not nations, but and they would secure Illyria and probably take Thrace. In 196 BC, Rome would probably ally with Egypt and many of the Dacian tribes who still remained, like the Jutai, I believe I'm saying that right, who would not be so friendly with Carthage and their ally Macedon. In 189 BC, I believe Macedon would invade Apulia, because like it would be similar to what Pyrrhus did. Excuse me. So yeah, he would. That was the southeastern corner of Italy near Tarentum. So yeah, they would take that. And Hannibal, who would still be kicking and alive and kicking in 188 BC, he'd probably take like southwest Gaul up to like where Bordeaux is with that river. I forget its name. I believe it's the Rhone, but don't quote me on that. And Egypt would take Crete. In 183 BC, both Hannibal and Scipio would die. In Hispania, Carthago Novo, Mago, who was Hannibal's younger brother, would take power, but would die a year later because he was still also he was younger than Hannibal by a lot. And I'm just gonna assume Hasdrubal is dead by this point. And it's succeeded by Hannibal's son, who I'm calling Hamalax. We don't know if Hannibal had kids because the Romans destroyed all the records of that. And the Populi Dux after Scipio is just a made-up character who I used a random name generator to call Flavius Attius Verus. In 171 BC, Rome would expand and take Massilia and Helvetica. Helvetica is like western Switzerland, and Massilia is like Marseille. It was Greek at the time. The Seleucids, who were they were a successor state of of Alexander, who controlled Persia, who would be trying to conquer Anatolia for years, would finally subjugate Pontus and the Cappadocians and conquer Anatolia. The Gauls would start raiding heavily into Iberia now that Hannibal is dead. And in 165 BC, I feel Carthage, as I said, their army was made of mercenaries. Probably there'd be some sort of change in power or something, or tax levy, or they wouldn't pay the mercenaries their due for a bit longer, and the mercenaries would revolt, as well as Mauritania. And Mauritania at this time wasn't like the Mauritania we know. It would be around Morocco. Rome would take advantage and invade Capua, which they would take quickly, and Samnia, which would take them about a year to defeat. Egypt would take advantage of this to take eastern Numidia. Numidia was a region from Algeria, southern Tunis, and parts of Libya. Although Carthage is, if you want to know, look it up, Numidia. In 164 BC, Nova Carthago, or Carthago Nova, I mix it up sometimes, would defeat Mauritania and would strong-arm the weaker Carthaginian government into letting them keep it. And Rome would ally many central Gallic tribes, such as the uprooted Aquitani, who would have lived in southwestern Gaul, which would have been taken by Nova Carthago. Carthago Nova, I'm sorry. In 162 BC, Carthage would finally stabilize and ally with the Seleucids in a pact against the Ptolemies, Egypt. They led Egypt. They were also a successor state of Alexander. In 159 BC, Rome would invade Sardinia, starting the Fourth Punic War. And you might be wondering, well, wouldn't by the Third Punic War Rome be just sacked like Carthage was? I don't believe so, because Rome and Carthage were different nations and their generals had different beliefs. And also, I feel it'd be harder to subdue Rome. I don't know if that's just historical bias, seeing what they'd accomplished, but they had a militant people and would probably rise back, as seen after Rome was razed by barbarians in 380 something BC. They rebuilt, so and I believe Hannibal would have a respect enough for Rome not to burn it. The third. So Rome would invade Sardinia, starting the Fourth Punic War. Rome would take Sardinia with probably like a legion, but before the Carthaginian navy could stop them. So that legion would be stuck in Sardinia. And the Carthaginian army would probably had gone through some reforms to not have so many mercenaries in it. So it would be weaker because the Carthaginians weren't as adapted to fighting. Although the the Hispanians were and would have worked a lot with the Carthaginians who were settling Carthago Nova. So I believe they would have actually had a very good army, like the Barcans' personal forces. But yeah, this meager Carthaginian army would land in West Sicily and meet up with the Syracusan army, while the rest of their forces would probably march into Numidia, who, as I said, would be allied with Rome, as well as many Dacians. So basically, we have Rome, many Gallic tribes, some Dacian tribes in Egypt, versus Carthage, Syracuse, Nova Carthago, who I'm just counting as different, but they were a part of Carthage, Macedon, and the Seleucids. The Romans would seize Syracuse probably and Apulia from the Macedonians. The Dacians would attack the Macedonians at Odosyra, which is Bulgaria, and push the Macedonians into Thracia. Hemelax, I think, would swiftly defeat Gallic invaders and defeat the Romans at the battle, like around where we have Barcelona. And Barcelona was actually named after the Barcas, I believe I heard a source saying it, but due to the butterfly effect, I'm not going to say it's there. I'm just going to say it's like near there. So I'm just going to refer to it as the Battle of Barcelona. Even though, yeah. So the Seleucids would take like Sinai. I don't know the Greek name for it, and would defeat the Ptolemaic army. In 158 BC, Rome would finally secure Sicily, and the garrison of Corsica, which would have been, as I said, taken in the Second Punic War by the Carthaginians, as well as the people. Corsica at this time was diverse. There was the Romans who came and colonized. They were a small portion. Carthaginians who would probably colonize, the Greeks, the native Celts, and I believe there would be a large Numidian mercenary garrison. I believe they would rebel and declare their independence, forming the Republic of Corcyrnos, which was what the Carthaginian, that was the Greek name for Corsica, because the Greeks had settled it, and Carthage actually, when they took it from the Greeks, they kept calling it Kyros. So now there's a republic in the world again. That's nice. Rome would defeat the Macedon and Dalmatia, which is, you know what Dalmatia is. Hemelax would lay siege to Massalia, but could not take it, and a Roman legion would push him back. Carthage would retake Numidia, and the Seleucids would take Alexandria, but I don't think they would burn the library. I think they would loot it and bring the stuff back to Ctesiphon, or let's say Ctesiphon, and form the Library of Ctesiphon, eighth wonder of the world. Macedon would halt the Dacian advance in Odosyra and start pushing back, but Dacia would take eastern Illyria. In 157 BC, they would agree to make treaties. Carthage would take Numidia back, and the Seleucids would take Sinai. Illyria would be split by Rome and the Dacian tribes, the western Dacian tribes. And Rome would also take Sardinia, Apulia, and Sicily. Flavius Attius Verus would die in 152 BC and would be succeeded by his son, who I'm naming Publius Verus, and Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio Africanus was named after his father, so he also carried that name. So I'm going to say that Publius Verus would be named after Scipio Africanus. So, in 147 BC, Carthaginian Sufit, because Carthage was a oligarchy and their leaders were Sufites, each of the oligarchs, named Carthalo, a lot of these names, it's hard to find Carthaginian names, so just look up names of famous Carthaginians and just take them. Would take complete power over Carthage and would kick out the oligarchy, forming a monarchy. The Scythians would destroy the Greek colonies in Crimea. In 146 BC, well, that would happen in 147 BC. In 146 BC, Hamalax would die and would be succeeded by his son, who I'm calling Hannibal II. In 143 BC, Carthalo would try to depose the Barcas, but he would definitely fail, and Carthago Nova would declare its independence and beating back the Carthaginian forces easily in civil war. But by now, Hispania would be in parts of Mauritania, not all. Mauritania is Morocco at the time. Would be worshiping the Barcas. They'd form a religion with the Barcas being godly, as well as some of their native religions, so creating such a fusion paganism. I haven't come up with a name, but I'm just going to call it Barcaism. In 139 BC, the Seleucids would attack the Macedonians, taking Thracia, and the Celts would start raiding, because at this time the Celts sort of controlled Germany, and the Gauls were really Celtic, originally, would start raiding Roman Helvetica, which is Switzerland, which would preoccupy the Romans for a while. In 137 BC, Carthage would invade Kyrnos and take it. In 132 BC, the Geltae, who were an eastern Dacian tribe and one of the strongest, would unite the Dacians and form Dacia and expand north and westward. And in 127 BC, there would be a Belgae who... This is just sort of a creative liberty of mine. The Belgae were a tribe in Belgium. That's where the name comes from. Named Iode would become king of the Belgae, and at this time Dacia would take Pannonia, which is in western Hungary, eastern Austria. This Iode guy is an invention of mine. I just came up with an idea of some sort of Celtic great Charlemagne, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan sort of uniter of peoples and great emperor. But he'll rise to power later. In 123 BC, the Cappadocians and Pontus would revolt because the Seleucids would be fighting in India. Macedon would take advantage of this and would retake Thrace. By the way, the Seleucids are Zoroastrian, which would also be a strong religion in this timeline. Publius Verres would die and would be succeeded by his son Romulus Verres. I'm bad with names, so I'm just naming him after the founder of Rome. In 120 BC, Carthala would die and be replaced by his brother Bostar. In Egypt, native Egyptians would rise up in the south, causing a civil war because the Ptolemies were Greek and not native Egyptians. In 118 BC, the Seleucids would invade Egypt. At this time, North Egypt would be Ptolemaic and south would be controlled by the actual Egyptians. In 117 BC, the Seleucids would take Crete and northern Egypt, while the south became Egyptian, reinstoring their own pharaoh and creating a more modern twist on the old religion, having the pagan gods, but also sort of similar to what Akhenaten did, and having instead of Atum, but having Ra be the god of gods, which he sort of was, but pushing him up to the nth degree. And by the way, I'm using BC, even though in this timeline the butterfly effect would, Jesus wouldn't be born. But I don't want to create a weird calendar. In 115 BC, Aode would become king of Celtica, which wouldn't include the Celts of England and Britain and Ireland, but the mainland, so Gaul and what we know as Germany, that at that time the Germanians hadn't come in yet, so it was still Celtic. In 113 BC, Hannibal II would die and he would be succeeded by Hannibal III. In 111 BC, Dacia and Macedon would war. And Macedon would probably win due to the Scythians, who would be attacking the Dacians from the north. Macedon would take most of the Dacian Black Sea coast. In 109, Bustar would be assassinated, and his young daughter, Didomir, would take power. I'm going to say she'd be like about 5 or 6, so wouldn't be on top of things, and many mercenaries would take this chance to revolt, one due to the change in power, and two, because I'm pretty sure in some cultures that these mercenaries would be from, the idea of a queen would be taboo. And in 107 BC, the mercenaries would finally win, and Carthage would be captured, and the nations would crumble. Although I don't believe Didomir would be deposed, Kurnos would regain their independence, and the kingdom of Numidia would be established with probably a strong military leader at the forefront. But that would probably collapse in a few years. But let's not talk about that yet. And Carthage would be reduced to a small city-state. That's the end of the scenario. Now, although I think I will definitely make a part 2 to this one day, probably 5 scenarios. My next scenario will be, what if the Second Silesian Uprising escalated into a war between Poland and Germany? I know, going from a pretty cliche Carthage wins Second Punic War thing to the Second Silesian Uprising. But yeah, that's my video. You can check out this map I made for 107 BC at the end of this scenario, and yeah, bye everyone.